Rick Ross is the same guy who spent nearly 20 years reminding the world about the fortune he built, the luxury cars he collected, the massive estates he owned, and the private jet lifestyle he wanted everybody to see. He crafted an entire brand around being larger than life, a rapper whose image was built on the idea that money was never a concern. But now, that very same Rick Ross has gone viral for something nobody expected: being spotted flying economy. Seriously, let that sink in for a moment. The biggest boss, sitting in a regular passenger seat, is not exactly the image fans have been sold all these years. The internet wasted no time reacting once those pictures started making the rounds, and trust me, we're going to unpack every part of this story, including Ross's response, which honestly might be one of the funniest damage control attempts we've seen in a long time. But that's only the beginning, because the airline photos are just one piece of a much bigger conversation. On top of that, reports suggest his concert tickets have been struggling to move. And we're not talking about a slight slowdown in sales. We're talking about buy one, get one free offers being pushed, and fans still not rushing to grab seats. Take a second and really think about how wild that sounds. Tickets are practically being handed out, and the demand still isn't there. This is where things take a surprising turn, because we're discussing someone who was once viewed as one of hip-hop's biggest financial success stories, a man whose wealth was estimated at around $100 million during his strongest years. Yet somehow, the same artist who once represented the peak of rap luxury is now facing headlines about economy flights and heavily discounted concert promotions. So what exactly happened? Where did all that momentum go? And what does this situation reveal about the image Rick Ross has spent decades building? Trust me, this story gets deeper the more you look into it. Let's break everything down right now. Before we get into the recent headlines, though, it's important to understand just how high Rick Ross once climbed, because the context makes today's situation even more shocking. During the height of his run, roughly between 2012 and 2016, various reports placed his net worth somewhere between $75 million and $100 million, and that's not a small number by any stretch of the imagination. We're not talking about money from rap records alone. We're talking about multiple streams of income, all generating wealth at the same time. His Maybach music group imprint was legitimately one of the most influential labels in hip-hop during that era. The roster included artists like Meek Mill, Whale, Gunplay, and several others who were creating major buzz while bringing in substantial revenue. His business arrangement with Warner Brothers was reportedly a significant financial win behind the scenes, and before that, his relationship with Def Jam had already helped position him extremely well financially. His albums were selling in large numbers and bringing in serious streaming revenue. His touring business was also thriving because fans genuinely showed up whenever Rick Ross was on the bill. But the money wasn't coming from music alone. Ross constantly highlighted his growing collection of Wingstop franchises as one of his biggest business achievements. And to be fair, that investment was actually a smart play. At one stage, reports suggested he controlled more than 22 Wingstop locations, and during the company's rapid expansion, those stores were generating significant returns. He had legitimate
business operations in place. He had endorsement partnerships. He also benefited from the Belaire Champagne relationship, which brought both income and brand exposure. And then there was the ultimate symbol of the Rick Ross lifestyle, the famous Promised Land estate in Fayetteville, Georgia. Listen, calling it a house doesn't even do it justice. We're talking about 109 rooms, one of the largest residential pools in Georgia, a private go-kart track, massive acreage, and a property that has been valued around $10 million after Ross reportedly purchased it for roughly $2 million back in 2010, making it one of the smartest real estate moves he ever made. So when you look at the peak years, the picture was crystal clear. A successful record label, multiple streams of business income, a growing Wingstop empire, a legendary estate, touring revenue, and endorsement checks all flowing at once. Rick Ross was undeniably wealthy. The boss image wasn't just marketing, it was backed by very real financial success. So how did we get here? This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Let me explain exactly what's going on. Because the journey from an estimated $100 million fortune to the headlines we're seeing today comes down to one major issue more than anything else: spending money in a way that prioritized appearances over sustainability. If we're being honest, a huge part of Ross's public financial identity wasn't centered on building wealth quietly. It was centered on showcasing wealth loudly. And those are two completely different mindsets. Building wealth means creating assets that continue producing income over time. Flexing wealth means spending money to convince everyone else you're winning. And for years, Rick Ross leaned heavily into the second option. Let's start with the vehicles, because this is one of the easiest examples to point to. Throughout different periods of his career, Ross accumulated multiple Rolls-Royces, several Bentleys, Lamborghinis, customized classics, and an assortment of luxury vehicles worth more than many people's homes. We're not talking about a couple of dream cars sitting in a garage. We're talking about a massive collection assembled largely to reflect status, create headlines, and reinforce the image of unlimited wealth. The jewelry tells a similar story. Over the years, Ross reportedly spent millions of dollars on jewelry. Massive custom chains, diamond-covered pieces, and luxury watches carrying price tags higher than what many people earn in an entire year. He proudly displayed it all, showcased it on social media, and consistently reminded the public that he was operating in a financial lane few could reach. But this is where things move from extravagant to potentially dangerous financially: maintaining the lifestyle itself. Owning a 109-room mansion sounds impressive until you start calculating what it actually costs to keep everything running. Staff salaries, utility bills, security expenses, repairs, and ongoing maintenance for a property that massive can drain money faster than most people realize. And let's be real for a second, maintaining something on that scale is incredibly expensive. People familiar with the situation have suggested that simply keeping the Promised Land estate operational required a huge amount of money every single month. That's cash leaving the account whether new money was coming in or not. Then you factor in private jet travel, payroll for staff, constant trips, studio sessions, business overhead, and label-related expenses, and suddenly you start seeing how quickly the numbers can shift when spending outpaces earnings. When you really break it down, it's honestly mind-blowing. Imagine building a fortune reportedly worth $100 million and still finding it difficult to maintain the lifestyle attached to it, because that lifestyle was built to look extraordinary, not necessarily to last forever. It was designed for perception. It was designed for headlines. And speaking of perception, we need to talk about the flexing, because that was a major part of the Rick Ross brand from day
one. Understanding that piece of the puzzle explains why these recent moments are generating so much attention online. Ross wasn't subtle about showing off his wealth. He made sure people noticed it, and he leaned into it intentionally. There's a long history of him presenting financial success as a way to separate himself from everyone else. Much of his public image revolved around the idea that he was operating on a level most people could never reach. The biggest boss persona wasn't just about confidence and ambition. It often came across as a statement of superiority. Whether it was through songs, interviews, or social media posts, there was always a message beneath the surface that felt pretty clear. I have the money and you don't. And that distinction matters more than people realize. You see where this is going, right? Because this becomes extremely important when we get to what happened next. When someone builds their entire reputation around having more money than everyone around them, spends years highlighting luxury travel, expensive experiences, and elite access, while indirectly looking down on ordinary lifestyles, and then ends up being photographed in the very environment they once implied was beneath them, the conversation changes instantly. At that point, the issue isn't just about money, it's about symbolism. It's the kind of irony the internet absolutely loves and refuses to ignore. And trust me, people didn't ignore it. Now let's talk specifically about the economy flight situation, because this might genuinely be one of the most talked about celebrity moments we've seen this year. The images that surfaced showed Rick Ross, the self-proclaimed biggest boss, the man who spent decades promoting a lifestyle centered around private aviation and luxury travel, sitting on a standard commercial flight, a regular seat, a regular row, surrounded by everyday passengers instead of stepping off a private jet like the image he spent years cultivating. The internet absolutely exploded. And honestly, it wasn't hard to understand why. Because people weren't reacting to just a photo. They were reacting to what that photo represented. It felt like a direct challenge to the brand Ross had been selling ever since he started rapping about wealth, luxury, and private planes. Fans weren't only laughing at the image itself, they were connecting the dots between that image and everything else happening around him lately. They looked at the economy seat, looked at the reports surrounding his career, and started asking the same question. Hold on, is the biggest boss actually struggling financially? So what did Ross have to say about all of this? And this is where the story becomes even more interesting. Ross explained that the reason he was flying commercial was because his private jet was reportedly getting a Starlink upgrade installed. Yes, seriously. According to him, the aircraft was in the shop getting satellite internet added to it. That was the explanation, the Wi-Fi upgrade explanation. The claim was that while the installation was being completed, he chose to take a commercial flight instead. But here's where many people started raising their eyebrows, because the explanation falls apart pretty quickly once you think about it for more than a few seconds. For starters, if someone truly operates at the financial level Ross has always claimed, there are alternatives available. One obvious option would be chartering another private jet. That's exactly why charter services exist in the first place. You make a call, arrange transportation, and continue traveling privately with ever stepping foot in a commercial terminal. It's a routine solution, and compared to the level of wealth Ross has often projected, the cost of a single charter flight would barely register as a major expense. Second, even if chartering somehow wasn't possible, which many people found hard to believe, there are still premium options available. First class exists, business class exists. Most people would expect someone with Ross's public image to choose one.
Those long before ending up in economy, and fans noticed that immediately. The reaction to his explanation ended up being nearly as entertaining as the original photos themselves. Very few people seemed convinced. The comment sections were relentless. Many felt they were watching someone scramble to explain a situation that directly contradicted years of branding. In their eyes, Ross had been caught in an uncomfortable moment and simply grabbed the first explanation that sounded reasonable enough to tell the public. And what made the situation even worse was how carefully crafted the explanation seemed. The story was delivered with such confidence and certainty that it ended up creating even more skepticism. What really fueled the online reaction was the tone Ross brought to the response. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't turn it into a joke. Instead, he came back aggressively defending the Starlink explanation, almost trying to present it as another luxury flex rather than damage control, as if upgrading the internet on a private jet was somehow proof that everything was still operating at an elite level. The more he doubled down, the harder it became for many people to buy into the story. Because people who are truly operating at the highest financial levels rarely feel the need to explain situations like this. Real wealth usually handles the inconvenience and keeps moving. The defensive energy is what caught everyone's attention. And honestly, watching it unfold in real time was fascinating. But here's the thing. The economy seat photos may not even be the biggest problem affecting Rick Ross's image right now. The ticket sales might be. And trust me, this part of the story gets even more surprising. Ross has been touring, and reports surrounding ticket demand have been far from ideal. To put it politely, the numbers haven't generated the kind of excitement many expected. We're talking about venues struggling to reach capacity and demand that appears significantly lower than what Ross experienced during the height of his career. And at one point, and yes, this actually happened, a buy one get one free promotion was introduced to help move tickets. Let that sink in for a second, because the optics of that are brutal when we're talking about someone with Rick Ross's public image. Buy one ticket, get another free, for the biggest boss. For the same artist who built a career around luxury, exclusivity, and the idea that his brand never needed discounts or compromises. The same artist whose entire identity has revolved around premium experiences and larger-than-life success. The suggestion that access to Rick Ross should feel exclusive has always been a major part of the package. That's why a 2-for-1 ticket offer feels so jarring. It's the concert business equivalent of seeing a luxury brand suddenly running clearance sales. It's the kind of decision organizations make when filling seats becomes more important than protecting perception. When attendance becomes the priority, the image sometimes takes a back seat. And here's the part that really caught people's attention. Even after the promotion was introduced, the response reportedly still wasn't where it needed to be. People were being offered extra value, and many still weren't rushing to purchase. Now let's talk about why that may be happening, because there isn't just one explanation. Several different factors appear to be colliding at the same time. First, there's the relevance factor. Whether people like hearing it or not, Rick Ross isn't dominating hip-hop conversations the way he did during his peak years. The industry has evolved. A newer generation of artists now controls much of the attention and momentum. His original fan base has gotten older. Meanwhile, many younger concertgoers have formed stronger connections with artists from a completely different era. That's simply how the music business works. Every artist faces the challenge of staying culturally relevant, and maintaining that relevance requires constant adaptation. Second, there's the image issue.
Your brand is built around being untouchable, wealthy, powerful, and always winning. Every headline that contradicts that image carries extra weight. The economy flight photos, the discounted ticket promotions, and questions surrounding various business ventures all contribute to the same narrative. Audiences start looking at things differently. Because for many fans, the Rick Ross experience wasn't only about the music itself, it was about the lifestyle being sold alongside the music. And once cracks start appearing in that fantasy, some of the appeal naturally begins to fade. Third, and this point matters a lot, the relationship Ross built with his audience has always been somewhat unique. He wasn't necessarily known for building deep emotional bonds through vulnerability or personal storytelling in the way some artists do. Much of the connection came from the spectacle. It came from the image. It came from the larger-than-life character he created. And spectacle can be incredibly powerful, but it can also be fragile, because once the spectacle starts losing its shine, there isn't always a deeper emotional connection keeping people invested. Now here's where the business side enters the conversation, because the Wingstop story reveals something important about the bigger financial picture. At one point, Ross's franchise portfolio was viewed as one of the smartest aspects of his entire wealth-building strategy. Franchise ownership can be extremely profitable when the parent company is growing and the locations are managed effectively. And for years, Ross's Wingstop investment looked like a textbook example of a rapper making a genuinely intelligent business move outside of music. But this is where the story takes another interesting turn. Here's the reality that a lot of people overlook. Owning a large franchise portfolio is not the same thing as collecting effortless passive income. It takes leadership, supervision, strategic decisions, and constant reinvestment to keep those businesses performing at a high level. Franchise operations can run into trouble for countless reasons. Store performance can decline, management teams can struggle, corporate policies can change, and economic conditions can impact how customers spend their money. And when you're a celebrity balancing music, appearances, business ventures, and everything else that comes with fame, successfully managing dozens of restaurant locations becomes a much bigger challenge than people realize. Reports suggesting that parts of Ross's Wingstop operation have faced obstacles in recent years only add another layer to the conversation. When you combine those reports with everything else surrounding his financial situation, a picture begins to emerge of business assets that may not have been producing at the level they once did. The revenue stream that was supposed to quietly generate income in the background while Ross focused on music and touring doesn't appear to be providing the same cushion it once provided. And when revenue stream starts slowing down at the same time touring revenue softens, while music income no longer resembles what artists earned during the peak physical album era, the financial picture starts looking very different from the image that's being projected publicly. That's the part many people miss. When you combine massive fixed expenses, estate maintenance, luxury lifestyle costs, staff payroll, travel expenses, and declining income streams, the math eventually starts moving in only one direction. And that direction is exactly why people are asking questions today. Now stay with me, because this is where the bigger lesson comes into focus. What's happening with Rick Ross goes far beyond celebrity gossip or internet jokes. In many ways, it's a case study in the difference between actually building wealth and simply appearing wealthy. Real wealth tends to operate quietly. Real wealth doesn't need daily validation from social media audiences. Real wealth isn't dependent on constant public attention. Real wealth is built on systems and assets that continue producing value whether people are watching or not, whether you're trending or not, and whether the spotlight is shining on you or not. That's where this conversation becomes interesting, because what Ross spent years promoting wasn't just wealth itself, it was the image of wealth. It was a carefully maintained spectacle that required constant reinforcement, constant visibility, and constant participation from the audience to keep the illusion alive. Every luxury vehicle, every oversized jewelry purchase, every private jet photo, every mansion tour became another piece of that performance. None of those things were necessarily creating new wealth. Most of them represented spending. Most of them represented maintaining an image. It was an ongoing cycle of consumption designed to send a message to everyone looking from the outside in. And for a long time, it worked extremely well. The brand was powerful enough, the music was successful enough, the businesses were profitable enough that the image and the reality seemed perfectly aligned. But maintaining a spectacle is expensive, and when revenue begins slowing down, the performance becomes much harder to sustain.
That's when people start seeing the difference between perception and reality. Which brings us back to the economy seat photo. Because that image wasn't just funny to people, it became symbolic. It represented a moment when the carefully crafted image and the questions surrounding the reality suddenly collided in public view. It was the moment the curtain moved just enough for people to start wondering what was really happening behind it. And once that happens, it's almost impossible for the audience not to notice.
Just want to know where my jet at. I obviously didn't get the memo. It's being updated with Starlink.
And Ross's response, the defensive over-explanation,
And honestly, Ross's response may have ended up creating more questions than answers. The lengthy defense, the Starlink explanation, and the intensity behind it all only amplified what many people were already thinking, that something about the situation simply wasn't lining up. When you stop and think about where this story started, it's actually remarkable. Let me tie everything together, because there's one final piece that brings the entire conversation full circle. At the height of his success, Rick Ross genuinely represented something inspiring for a lot of people. Whether you were a fan of the music or not, there was something admirable about a kid from Carroll City, Miami, fighting his way into the industry and building businesses around his success instead of relying solely on music. The franchise investments, the record label, the real estate acquisitions, those were legitimate moves. There was a version of Rick Ross that looked like a blueprint for long-term success. Unfortunately, that version slowly became overshadowed by another version. The version that seemed more focused on looking down on ordinary people for living ordinary lives. The version that poured enormous amounts of money into maintaining an image designed to separate himself from everyone else. The version that often appeared to prioritize perception over foundation. And now, with economy flight photos circulating online, ticket promotions struggling to generate excitement, questions surrounding business performance, and a financial narrative that no longer matches the image people were sold for years, all of those issues appear to be colliding at the exact same moment. But here's the part that really stands out to me. What if the biggest loss wasn't financial at all? What if the real cost of spending years building a larger-than-life persona was the damage done to credibility? Because money, at least in theory, can always be earned again. Trust and belief from an audience are much harder to recover once people stop buying into the story. The people laughing at those economy flight photos aren't just reacting to a travel choice. They're reacting to what they see as the unraveling of a character that was carefully crafted over 2 decades. They're reacting to years of hearing about unlimited wealth, unmatched success, and an untouchable lifestyle, only to watch moments emerge that seem to tell a very different story. And if we're being real, this may be one of the clearest examples we've seen of what happens when maintaining the image becomes more important than maintaining the foundation underneath it. The lesson isn't necessarily that Rick Ross lost money. The lesson is that at some point, the cost of proving success can become greater than the value of the success itself. That's the part people can't stop talking about. The biggest boss, economy seat, regular flight, internet debating every detail. That's a headline nobody would have predicted years ago. So now the question goes to you. Is this simply a rough chapter in Ross's story that he'll eventually bounce back from? Or are we witnessing the end of the era that made the biggest boss one of the most recognizable personas in hip-hop? Let me know what you think, because this conversation is far from over.